What's up guys, it's Nathan and we're down here at ZIMM'S Guitars. Today we're going to be checking out this 64 Princeton amp, and this is down here at the shop, and if we play it right now you can see that we're on 6 on the volume. So it's still super clean, and even if we dime it, it's on 10 now. Still super clean, and you know, whenever you have an amp that's cranked like this, it should be breaking up. Even on 10 it should definitely have some dirt to it. So what I think is going on is that it's not biased correctly. So we're gonna go in there, we're gonna check the plate voltages, plate current, we're gonna calculate the plate dissipation and all that, and then we're gonna see if we need to change out the bias resistor or capacitor. Hopefully the amp will be sounding good after that. Cool, so we're taking this back panel off right now. We're going to pop the chassis out, and we'll see what's going on inside of there. I could tell it's already got some components replaced on it because it's got a 3-prong cord. And these things weren't even existing in 1964, so that's a dead giveaway. If you want to check this thing out, well, we got it. It looks like they've replaced the filter caps, but they put in 20 microfarads for each of those, which is what's supposed to be in the amp, so that's cool. So you know, this is one of the things I always want to do whenever I get a customer's amp or whatever it is. You know, I buy one for myself. You always want to check what kind of fuse is in here, and you can see right there it says we need a 1 amp slow blow. So if we look, it looks like this one's a 1 amp. Yep. So you know, if you don't have the right fuse in there, something shorts and there goes your transformers. And if there's one thing that's going to damage the value of your amp, is going to be replaced transformers. I'm having trouble getting this thing back in there. There you go. So you always want to check the fuse, you know, even if you're not necessarily having problems with the amp shutting off or whatever, but it's just a safety precaution, you know. Alright, so if you're taking these chassis out, they unscrew from the top. And on the inside there's a little nut, so you got to grab that. There's 4 of those. There's one side. So I don't know if you could see that in the video, but the chassis dropped a little bit. But in all these Fender amps, the nice thing is that they kind of sit on these little ledges right here and on the baffle. So it doesn't just drop out like it would in a tweed amp or something. So take these chassis straps off, and the chassis should just slide right out. I always like to just grab it by one of the transformers, kind of give it a nice pull. It's going to come out just like that. So one thing that you got to know about tube amps is that whenever you turn it on, you always have to have the speaker connected or a resistance load box or whatever, because your output transformer is expecting to see a certain impedance, and without an impedance it's going to blow your transformer. So you always want to make sure that you have the speaker plugged in. I always like to set the amp up like this because it's like a perfect working bench. You know, it's like a perfect surface. Because the amp will just sit right in there like that, and you'll be able to see everything, see what's going on, and you can easily plug the speaker in without having to have like an extension cable coming out. So the first couple things that we're going to do is we are going to measure. So this is this amp is tube rectified. So if we want to measure the resistance across the transformer for each tube on there, we're going to have to measure from pin 8 of the GZ34 to pin 3 of each of the 6v6 power tubes. Okay, so the first step that we're going to do is we are going to measure from pin 8 of the rectifier tube to pin 3 of each of the 6v6. And what that's going to do is it's going to tell us the resistance across the center tap of the transformer to the plate of each power tube. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Here's pin 8 and pin 3. And our amp is turned off right now. So that's measuring 157.2 ohms. 157.2 ohms. And we've got to do that for the inner tube now. And that's measuring 152.9. 152.9 ohms. Okay. So next what we're going to want to do is we're going to power the amp up. And you're going to make sure that you don't you're not touching anything in here. Probably be good if we plug the amp in first. All right. Okay, so we've got the amp on. Give it a couple seconds to warm up. And we're going to measure from the same points, but we're going to be taking a voltage measurement this time. So make sure you set your multimeter to voltage. And our voltage drop is 1.53 volts. 1.53 volts. So that was for the outer tube. And now we're going to check the inner tube. That was negative 5.5 volts. 5.5 volts. Let me take a measurement of those again just to make sure, because those aren't lining up very nicely. Okay, so right now one of the tubes is pulling a lot more current than the other. And it seems like that's going to be because our power tubes are not matched. You know, so if we calculate the plate current on each of those tubes right now, we're going to have 5.5 volts over 152.9 ohms, and that's going to give us 35.9 milliamps of plate current. And if we do the other tube, we're going to have 1.53 over 157.2, and we're only getting 9 milliamps of plate current. So there's our problem right there. Our tubes are not matched. So I'm going to measure the plate voltage on both of these right now. We have one on ground. 434. 431. Okay, so those are looking alright. 434 volts, 431. Okay, so if we check the bias on this, since the tubes are mismatched, that means that this tube on the left here is actually drawing a lot more current. It's drawing 34.7 milliamps, and the tube on the right is only drawing 8.9 milliamps. So the tubes are definitely mismatched pretty badly. And since this one is working a lot harder, it's working at 123% of its maximum plate dissipation. So we're like overworking that tube. And the tube on the right here is only working at 32% of its maximum plate dissipation. So you could see that there's almost, 100% difference in those two. So we're going to go ahead and switch them out with a nice match set of tubes, and we'll check the bias again. And hopefully it'll be working how we want it to, and it's going to be sounding good. So we've got the amp flipped over. We got a new set of JJ matched power tubes here, 6v6s. So we're going to go ahead and replace these old power tubes here. It's kind of a shame that they're so mismatched, because we actually have a nice set of RCA 6v6s for both of those. So these might very well have been the original tubes in the amp. I can't say for sure. Here's the other one. And we've had the amp off for about 2 or 3 minutes now, and this tube here is cold, and this one is actually still pretty hot. Like it's barely at the temperature now where I can hold the base and not burn my fingers. And just the temperature alone right there is showing me that one is drawing a lot more current. It's working a lot harder than the other one. So hopefully the new fresh set of tubes will kind of fix this problem that we're having. Hopefully it's a bias issue and not something else that we got to worry about. But if it is, no big deal. We'll get it figured out. So let's unwrap these 6v6s and see what we got. Okay, so just your standard JJ 6v6 there. And this should be the matching one. Okay, so we're going to spray out these tube sockets while we're doing this. So I just want to spray those out, because sometimes the dirty connections can actually cause voltage problems and whatnot. So whenever we put it in, might want to wiggle it in up and down a couple times just to make sure that those sockets are getting cleaned out. Okay. And while we're over here on the underside of the amp, I just wanted to show you that I don't know if you could see it from here, but this cap can has been replaced, which is nice to see, because that'd be something we'd be doing. And I don't think we mentioned this earlier in the video, but you could see that all of the electrolytics in here, they've all been replaced too. So luckily we ain't got to do anything with that. And the bias cap up here has been replaced as well. The first step to biasing our amp is we're going to want to measure the resistance across each half of the transformer that the power tube shares. So this amp is tube rectified, meaning that it has a tube rectifier here rather than being solid state rectified with diodes. And what we're going to do is on your tube rectifier, this is a GZ34. we can measure from pin 8 on our rectifier, and then we could put our other pin on the plate of each 6v6, which is pin 3. So right now our resistance is measuring 157.4 ohms. So that was the left tube, right tube. That was the resistance across there. So it was 157.4 ohms. So we're going to measure the same thing again for the right power tube, from the same pin 8 on the rectifier tube to pin 3 of the 6v6, 153.3. So that is 153.3. Okay, so next what we're going to do is we're going to actually measure from the same points, and we're going to measure the voltage drop between the transformer, which is, we can measure from pin 8 of the rectifier tube to the plate of each 6v6 tube. So at this point is when we're actually going to plug our amp in. For that first step, our amp was unplugged, turned off. So now we're going to plug the amp in, turn it on, and we're going to want to let it warm up a little bit, just so that we could get some accurate voltage readings on there. Just letting it warm up for a couple seconds should be fine. And we're going to measure the voltage drop from pin 8 of the rectifier to pin 3 of each 6v6. Oh. Make sure that you set your multimeter to read voltage. So that's reading 4.1 volts. So 4.1 volts. And we'll measure the second one now, which is measuring 4.04. So I could already tell right now that these power tubes are looking a lot closer in their plate current. Okay, so if you get yourself a little chart like this, it's easy to measure out each plate voltage and plate dissipation in the end and plate current. So what we're going to do to measure the plate current, so there's two ways to do it. This is going to be the way I recommend, is by calculating it, and there's another way where you can actually lift up the lead that's going to the plate and put your multimeter on to read amps, and put it in series with it, but you have to break the circuit to do that, and it's a lot more hazardous. So what we're going to do is we're actually just going to divide what we got in the voltage drop, and we're going to divide it by the resistance. So you do V drop divided by resistance. So if we calculate that, right now we'll have 4.1 volts divided by 157.4 ohms, and that's going to give us a plate current of 26 milliamps. So we're going to have 0.026 amps. And for the other tube, we have 4.04 divided by 153.3, and we have 26.35 milliamps. So 0.0263 amps. So before, on the last set of tubes, we had one tube pulling 34.7 milliamps and the other was pulling 8.9 milliamps. So those were pretty far off. In this case, we have the outer tube pulling 26 milliamps and the other one is pulling 26.3 milliamps. So we're almost dead on there. So we're going to have to make one more measurement before we shut our amp off. And we're going to measure from ground, so anywhere on the chassis to pin 3 of each 6v6, which is the plate. So right now we're going to calculate, or we're going to measure the plate voltage on each of the 6v6 tubes. So I put my ground lead anywhere on the chassis, and I measure pin 3, and we're at 422 volts. 422 volts. And then we're going to measure on the right tube, same thing, pin 3, and we're measuring 422 volts. Oh, that's perfect. Man, we have the same plate current and the same plate voltage, so that means that these tubes are going to have pretty much the exact same plate dissipation. So what the plate dissipation is going to tell us is it's going to tell us how much power each tube is putting out. So our answer will be in watts. So it's going to tell us how much wattage each power tube is putting out. So all we have to do for that is multiply the voltage by the current, and that's going to give us power, which is our plate dissipation. So if we do we have our plate current, which is 26.3 milliamps, and if we multiply that by 422 volts, we get 11.12 watts. So this one is at 11.12 watts. And if we have 26 milliamps times 422 volts, we get 10.97 watts. So 10.97 watts. These 6v6s, they have a 12 watt recommended maximum output. So if we do 10.97 divided by 12, that's at 91%. And if we do 11.12 divided by 12, that's at 92.6%. So this amp is definitely going to be breaking up more. We'll test it out, and we'll see how heavy it breaks up, how much headroom it has, and depending on how we like the headroom and how we like how it's breaking up, we might leave it. If we want a little bit more headroom, want it to be a little cleaner for a little longer, we're going to have to swap out this resistor value. And right now it's at 27K, which is what calls for on the schematic. So as far as everything goes right now, besides the electrolytics, everything is stock, and the tubes. So if this amp came from the factory right now, this is how it would be. This is how it would be biased, because it has the correct bias resistor up in there. And if it breaks up too much and we want to kind of tame it down a little bit, we're going to have to increase that that bias resistor up there. So we might change it from a 27 to a 35K to start with, and see kind of where it takes us. And you know, whenever you're biasing it, as long as you're running it underneath the maximum wattage for each power tube, then you're usually going to be fine. It's just all to taste, whether you like your amp to have a lot of headroom or where you kind of want it to break up early on the dial. I guess it kind of all depends on what kind of stuff you play and what kind of pickups you're putting through it. So since we did the demo in the beginning with some single coils, we'll go back out there right now and test it out with the same guitar, and hopefully we hear a pretty big difference. Alright, so we got this Princeton back out here. We got to put it back in the cabinet, and here it is on 5 right now in the volume. We're playing through some single coil pickups again, so it already is like a bit louder than it was before. It's still super clean at 5, so we'll put it at 10. So it's got some crunch to it. You know, it's not like a Marshall or anything. It's not gonna give you like a ton of gain. If we wanted for it to break up a little harder than that, we could change out the bias resistor in there, actually decrease the resistance on it, and it'll drive the tubes a little harder. But I think it sounds good how it is. It's a lot more powerful than it was before, and it gives you a little bit of crunch, you know. So next we'll show you the tremolo. We're back down on 5 on the volume. But the cool thing about these, the Princetons, the black face ones, they actually have what's called a bias varying tremolo. So what it actually does is, depending on what you have the intensity set on, it kind of chops up the amount of current that's getting put into the tubes. So if you have a Princeton and you're biasing it, make sure that you have the intensity all the way down, or else when you're taking your plate voltage readings, they'll just be like jumping up and down like crazy. So that type of tremolo sounds really good on these black face amps. So overall, pretty happy with how it turned out. It sounds a lot better than it did before, and it's all good to go now. It's running strong. So thanks for watching, and come by ZIMM'S Guitars and check it out.